Well, joining us now live via webcam from Geneva is the chairman of the UN panel that prepared that report, the former Australian High Court Judge Michael Kirby. Can I ask you first, sir, there have been so many stories that have circulated over the years about North Korea. How hard was it for you to separate propaganda from hard facts?
Well, we had to concentrate on the facts that were placed before us, mainly by the witnesses who came and gave testimony before the Commission of Inquiry, but also by experts who've been studying it for many years. I was not an expert on North Korea, and therefore I could approach the matter with a fair degree of dispassion. In the end, we didn't really find it difficult either to get testimony, get witnesses, or to separate out from the propaganda. You can generally smell propaganda a mile off, both from North and South Korea. And in the end, our report is based on fact, and I think it's the more compelling because it refers constantly to the testimony of the witnesses and allows the people who've been victims of human rights violations to speak directly to the United Nations and the world.
And to that end, why was it necessary to produce this report? Can I ask for your assessment in response to that?
The report comes because the Council, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, which is the highest organ of human rights in the UN system, specifically set up the Commission of Inquiry. It did that last March, and interestingly, it did so in a resolution which didn't go to a vote. There was no call for a vote, and that itself indicates, I think, that North Korea and its friends and allies are really facing the reality that the international community is fed up with decades of reports that have not really been adequately responded to. The Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on Human Rights has not been permitted to go into North Korea for 10 years. We were not permitted, but we didn't find it difficult to get witnesses. In the end, we had to cut off the number of witnesses. We'd reached about 300, that was necessary because of the time constraints of reporting to the Human Rights Council, which we must do in a month's time. But meantime, the report has been released in the English language version, this is calling attention to the really shocking state of human rights in North Korea. There's no other word to use, shocking and an affront to humanity.
North Korea has responded by describing your report as a quote, product of politicisation of human rights on the part of EU and Japan in alliance with the US hostile policy. Give characteristic words there from the North Korean regime. Now, given that apparent intransigence and the fact that North Korea is already a rogue state and an international pariah, what difference can you hope your report can make for the people of North Korea?
What is unusual about the report is that it brings together, in, I hope, an authoritative, dispassionate and calm manner, the testimony on a whole range of subjects that were in the mandate given to us by the Human Rights Council. I have no reason to have any hostility towards North Korea. It's not been a matter upon which I have studied or examined over the years. I'm not an expert on North Korea. I do have some knowledge of human rights and international human rights, and I could just look at the matter from a dispassionate point of view, analyse what was said and put it before the international community. And the value of the report is that it gathers it all together. You now don't have to go to a whole lot of other sources. They are footnoted and referred to, but it's examined, revealed and analysed. And at the end of the Second World War, people constantly said, if only we'd known, if only we'd been aware of what was going on in the occupied states of Nazi Germany. But now there's no excuse. The international community and good people everywhere and the organs of the United Nations have a report which packs it all together, analyses it, examines the question of whether there are crimes against humanity, concludes that there are, and calls for action, and lays out a series of steps that should be taken by the international community. And I hope and expect that those steps, or many of them, will be taken.
In the case of international pariah states like North Korea, it's sometimes argued that encouraging positive engagement with those states is a preferable course to increasing their alienation and isolation. Did that play upon your mind while you were preparing your report?
Yes, and in our report we set out the various options for rendering accountable those who are guilty. I mean, we're not talking here about an occasional bad apple in the administration of North Korea. We're talking about state-supported and intentional actions against the civilian population that affront the conscience of humanity. That's the test in international law for crimes against humanity. And therefore, we've got a tremendous body of material. One of the options we did examine was a peace and reconciliation commission, such as they had in South Africa. And obviously, if there were any basis of hoping or expecting that that would work in the case of North Korea, we would have embraced it. But generally speaking, it can only be done with the support of all factions, with the outreach of people of the moral strength of Nelson Mandela, and also the strength of the former President de Klerk in South Africa, of a decision to turn to a different approach. And none of that is evident in the either in the past actions of North Korea or even in their response to the report over the last day. Instead, the response has been exactly the same as it's always been. This is false testimony by human scum. Well, now the testimony is now online. It's available in our public hearings. They are available for the whole world to see who have access to the internet. And that, of course, doesn't include the citizens of North Korea. But the world can judge whether we are right in assessing these as brave, honest witnesses who have fled the country and have come forward to help the United Nations to mobilise the international community to ensure that there is accountability. Where there are great crimes, there has to be accountability.
Was there the testimony of a particular witness that spoke to you, Mr. Kirby, that particularly moved you? Well,
as you would know, for 30-odd years, I was a judge in Australia, and I had to deal with a whole range of evidence. Much of it was distressing and stressful and horrible. But in the case of North Korea, it's the very enormity, the number, the duration, and the horror of the crimes that are revealed in the statements of the witnesses. One of the witnesses comes to mind immediately. He was in a political prison camp. He gave testimony of the fact that he had buried or burned 300 of his fellow inmates who simply died of starvation. There was an apparent systematic approach of starving the prisoners in the political prison camps who were enemies of the state and of the party. And the result of that was that when they starved to death, they had to be disposed of. Their bodies had to be removed. And he told the story of putting them on wheelbarrows and burning them, and then taking the partly burned and partly decomposed bodies and burying them as fertilizer in the fields close to the camp. All of this conjured up images that we learned at the end of the Second World War that led to the establishment of the United Nations, that led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And these are the steps that have led to a body such as the Commission of Inquiry. And the question that is now faced is, will the international community grasp this nettle and pick up the findings that we've made and act as the conscience of humanity requires them to do?